Who said you could sit? I'm sorry, everyone. Such a clueless and embarrassing daughter-in-law. My mother-in-law, who had just tripped me by kicking my leg, was now acting all sweet and smiley to the relatives around her. People nearby offered their hands to help me up, but my mother-in-law stopped them. I gritted my teeth, holding on to my aching left leg. It's still slightly swollen, but that's the spot I fractured just a month ago. My mother-in-law was flaunting around the relatives, acting like she could treat me, her daughter-in-law, like a mere servant. But then, someone appeared, and just like that, mother-in-law reputation crumbled. My name is Jennifer. I'm 24 this year, and I live with my husband. We both work full-time. I met my husband at a matchmaking event organized by a friend. Back then, I thought the idea of getting married was silly, and I was too shy to even consider dating someone. Plus, I was always so focused on my studies that I didn't have many friends. Because of my personality, a few of my close friends worried that I might end up single and with few friends for the rest of my life. So, they strongly insisted and brought me to the event. I wasn't looking for a life partner, but by chance, I met Ken, who's 2 years older than me. He turned out to be a senior colleague of the friend who had invited me. Apparently, Ken was also one of those who got dragged into attending the event. My friend whispered to me, "If you don't find anyone else you like, just chat with this guy," so I did just that. It seems Ken too felt the same way. I later found out he said he'd be with me only if there weren't any other women he liked. In the end, I did attend an event for singles, but later on, I ended up dating Ken, just as my friend had suggested. According to my friend, Ken and I seemed to have similar vibes, so they thought we might be a good match, and it turned out they were right. While we weren't exactly finishing each other's sentences, there were times I knew what Ken was thinking or trying to say, and it seemed he felt the same way about me. We had a comfortable, friendly relationship despite being a couple and eventually got married quite naturally. Up to this point, everything had been smooth, and I was surprised that someone like me, who isn't really good at socializing, got married. But then, hell began. Ken's family home was about as far as taking a high-speed train from my hometown, say, like traveling from New York to Chicago. I moved in with my in-laws as soon as we got married. Now, living with in-laws might conjure up images of nasty mother-in-law drama for some. In my case, I thought Ken's parents might be as laid-back as Ken himself. But the moment I stepped into their house, an older woman said to me, "You're Jennifer? What's with that messy hair?" Before I could say anything, an older woman said that to me, leaving me stunned. I realized she was Ken's mom because her crescent-shaped eyes when she smiled looked just like his. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I hope you'll like this." Trying to hide my unease, I handed over a gift box that was in a paper bag. Without reaching for it, my mother-in-law said, "I'm busy, so get ready and come to the kitchen right away. You can unpack later." And then she just disappeared into a room. My father-in-law, who had been silent the whole time, was the one who took the gift. However, he didn't make eye contact with me and mumbled something under his breath as he walked in a different direction from my mother-in-law. Meanwhile, Ken just went inside without a word of explanation or apology. I felt uneasy about the family dynamics I had glimpsed in that brief moment, but I didn't have time to hesitate. As my mother-in-law had told me, I handed my luggage over to Ken and quickly headed for the kitchen. Hearing my footsteps, my mother-in-law turned around and gave me a sharp glare. "Do you not tie your hair back when you cook at home? Do you have some tradition where a husband drinks a tea made from his wife's hair or something?" Seems she purposely described my naturally curly hair as messy earlier. I wasn't expecting to start cooking as soon as I arrived, and it appeared she didn't like that I had my hair half up. "I'm sorry. I'll tie it back and come right back." As I was about to leave the kitchen, she said, "Don't you dare drop even a strand of your uncultured hair. And if you're gonna tie it, these hold the best," handing me a pile of rubber bands. I was somewhat prepared to be bullied as the new daughter-in-law, but I hadn't expected such direct animosity. My mother-in-law was a tricky person to deal with. Most would assume mothers bully their daughters-in-law because they feel their precious son has been taken away, but it didn't seem that way with her. That's because she was tough on Ken and my father-in-law as well. Especially towards Ken, she'd often say, "You're so weak-willed that you could only get a good-for-nothing wife like her," or "despite me constantly telling you not to turn out like your dad." She was really mean with her words. Ken and my father-in-law just kept quiet, not retaliating at all. I decided that she must have some sort of condition where mother-in-law can't survive without making snide remarks. I managed to endure that. However, there were times when mother-in-law was in an especially bad mood and only my meal wouldn't be served. Ken and my father-in-law saw this, but both pretended not to notice. Ken, in an attempt to appease her, would even join in on her nasty remarks about me. Despite being a grown man, he didn't have the guts to speak up to his mother. He acted as if everything his mom said was right, blaming me for it. It made me sad, and at the same time, I was utterly dumbfounded by his attitude. As for my father-in-law during these times, he would be as inconspicuous as possible, quickly leaving the room whenever my mother-in-law started harping on me. The reason not only Ken but also my father-in-law couldn't stand up to her became evident through her harsh words. "You married into our family, so you have no right to talk back to me. Everything you have now is thanks to my father. If you have any complaints, why don't you speak up? You'd be cursed by my father." It didn't seem like the father-in-law was afraid of being cursed, but he seemed to feel inferior because he married into the family. Having seen his father being submissive to his mother since he was young, Ken probably realized that his mother was the strongest in the family. Just like his father, he always tried to gauge his mother's mood and would either stay silent or agree with her, no matter what she said. I, already anxious about living in my in-laws' house, was soon faced with a predicament. From the day we started living together, I was made to accompany my mother-in-law on her weekly grocery and household shopping trips. One day, after getting used to carrying bags full in both hands, I went to the usual supermarket that my mother-in-law always frequents. It was a weekend, so the elevator we usually took was crowded, and we couldn't use it right away. Impatient, my mother-in-law quickly grew frustrated that there wasn't a single elevator on the ground floor, exclaiming, "Forget it. It's a waste of time to wait here. Let's just use the stairs." Though she always has me fetch even just a single TV remote for her, it was surprising to hear such words from my mother-in-law. If I dared to speak out, I felt like she might just bite my head off, so I silently obeyed. Walking diagonally behind my fast-paced mother-in-law, I reached out instinctively when she almost tripped over the hem of her dress. In that split second, I stretched out my hand and supported her back to prevent her from falling. But in doing so, I lost my balance and ended up tumbling down a few steps. Until then, everything had been okay. However, because of what I did, I neglected to watch my own step. I lost my balance and fell. "Hey! What the heck are you doing?" Instead of showing concern, my mother-in-law scolded me. Oddly enough, I was more surprised by her reaction than the pain I felt. I'd only fallen down a few steps, but it seemed like I'd twisted my ankle pretty badly. Noticing the rapidly swelling ankle, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue in annoyance. "Ugh, you're so clumsy. With that ankle, you won't be able to carry the groceries properly. Just wait in the car. It's pointless having you here." I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it's pretty harsh considering I got hurt while trying to help my mother-in-law. But if I mentioned that, she'd probably snap at me even more, so I just quietly went back to the car, reclined the seat, and took a rest. The next day, once the household chores had settled down, I went to the doctor around noon. I thought it was just a sprain, but it turned out I had a hairline fracture, and they gave me crutches for the way home. I texted mother-in-law about it, letting her know I'd gotten medicine and would be a bit late. The lack of a response was par for the course, letting me know mother-in-law didn't care in the slightest. Struggling with crutches I wasn't used to, I got home only to be immediately told by my mother-in-law, "Change the light bulb in the bathroom. The ceiling is high, so just use the ladder from the backyard. And make sure to clean that dirty floor." I was taken aback by her usual uncaring attitude. It wasn't that I wanted her to be concerned for me. But, there's no immediate need to use the bathroom, and couldn't the light bulb replacement wait for Ken or the father-in-law to get back from work? Having someone with a bad leg climb up a ladder on a slippery floor, it showed mother-in-law lack of humanity. And of course, when Ken and father-in-law came home, neither showed any concern. All I got was mother-in-law yelling at me for not doing chores efficiently with my injured foot. From that point, her mistreatment of me intensified. Though she didn't lay a hand on me, I was constantly berated with cruel words, increasing my stress. About a month into this life, while I was weeding the garden, protecting my slowly healing foot, mother-in-law approached me. "There's a family dinner next week. Knowing you, you don't have any formal dresses, right? I'll lend you one of mine, but make sure you fix that messy hair of yours for the day." Ever since the marriage, she had made me quit my job. I had no money of my own, yet mother-in-law never stopped taking digs, even about the texture of my hair. Thanks to her, I was always forced to tie my hair up tightly, making me feel like I was aging even more. Ken said that family dinners are held about once every 3 months, and everyone who gathers there holds a high social status. Whether they're highly educated and employed at major companies, or entrepreneurs with over 500 employees under them, they're all elites in their respective fields, it seems. When I actually went, I noticed that in the parking lot of the reserved restaurant, everyone was standing around in groups, chatting and mingling with those high-status individuals. Even though I was the newbie, many approached me to chat, but my mother-in-law would almost always intervene. "This is my daughter-in-law, Jennifer. Sure, she's dressed up nicely now, but on a regular day, if no one says anything, she'd be in sweatpants with unkempt hair. It seems she put in extra effort today knowing she'd meet all of you. Honestly, it's a bit much, isn't it?" Despite the awkward smiles from others, my mother-in-law kept bad-mouthing me. Some kind person tried to divert the conversation, but my husband, Ken, either stayed silent or just nodded along to whatever his mom said. The mother-in-law sweet-talked everyone in a cloying tone and even handed out small gifts to each person. When we finally entered the restaurant, the seating arrangement seemed to be decided by some unspoken rules. I was about to take a seat following Ken, but my mother-in-law, who was talking with someone, darted over immediately. "What do you think you're doing sitting down as a daughter-in-law? Stand up." Incredibly, she kicked my injured left foot. Losing my balance, I fell hard to the ground. I let out a soft cry, writhing in pain. I had just had the cast removed, so there was no protection, and I felt the pain directly. Looking down at me, the mother-in-law quickly said to the others, "I apologize for the scene. My lack of discipline has caused this embarrassing display. She should at least fake it better, right? After her own carelessness got her injured, she only knows how to play for sympathy." Mother-in-law may have been panicking inwardly at my fall, spewing nonsense rapidly. A few nearby people offered to help me up, but she stopped them all. "It's all right, no need to be kind to a liar. I'll give her a piece of my mind, so don't you worry about it." Mother-in-law grabbed my arm, trying to force me up while swiftly taking her own seat. I was sitting on the cushion. Being treated like a mere doll by my mother-in-law and the glances from the surrounding people made me feel embarrassed and irritated. I took a deep breath, ready to express the feelings I'd been holding back. But suddenly, someone approached from behind, brushed past me, and touched the back of my mother-in-law. "Oh, big mother-in-law!" The startled voice of my mother-in-law. Judging by her words, it must be my husband's grandmother. The woman was elegant in a pale-colored dress, but her tight-lipped expression gave off a cold vibe. "I heard you weren't coming today." "Well, I did say I might not be able to make it because I had plans, but I made a reservation just in case I could." "What, shouldn't I have come?" "No, it's not like you shouldn't have come. I'm delighted." My mother-in-law suddenly looked timid and scared. The big mother-in-law told my father-in-law, "Go ahead and start," and led my mother-in-law to a corner of the room. When I tried to stand up, the big mother-in-law stopped me. "You've got that leg injury, right? It's not good to strain yourself. Just relax and sit next to Ken." Her commanding presence was undeniable, so I just complied. As the big mother-in-law was about to return to her seat, my mother-in-law, standing in the corner, spoke up. Big mother-in-law, What is it? You should just stand there. If you have something to say it from there. Without even looking back, the big mother-in-law sharply responded. Why do I have to stand? I came because I wanted to dine with you. Peeks from other relatives made my mother-in-law's face turn even redder. What a ridiculous thing to say. Did you really think you, being just the daughter-in-law, can sit? It's about what you said to Jennifer earlier, isn't it? Don't you think you should set an example? Faced with the big mother-in-law's firm response, my mother-in-law's face turned even brighter red. Soft chuckles could be heard from somewhere. You used to be such a sweet girl when I first met you. When did you become so mean? If I knew you were like this, I wouldn't have let my son marry into your family. Well, my son did run away from home because he didn't like me, so I can't say much. My father-in-law, seated in front of me, shifted uncomfortably. Turns out, the silly reason my father-in-law married into the family wasn't because of a lack of heirs or any special reason, but seemingly to escape his strict mother. And the big mother-in-law just wouldn't stop talking. Everyone had stopped eating and was listening intently. I was shocked when he ran away from home, only to come back casually with a wife and son. You'd think they've done a remarkable job raising their child, but here they are, both of them, pretending not to notice their daughter-in-law being mistreated right in front of them. From the daughter-in-law's perspective, she must feel she's married into quite the family, huh? Why don't you two show everyone those dumbfounded faces of yours? Big mother-in-law pointed at father-in-law and Ken, who were seated, making them stand next to mother-in-law. These folks are a disgrace, being rude to relatives who've come from outside. Remember them well. I felt she might be overdoing it, but seeing the three of them, heads down, made me feel better. All eyes were on them when mother-in-law spoke up again. Big mother-in-law. I've been trying to educate this failure of a daughter-in-law. She barely does her chores, using her foot injury as an excuse, and even puts on a show of pain in public. My husband and son listen to me, but the daughter-in-law's defiance disrupts the household order. While accusing others of putting on a show, mother-in-law pretended to wipe tears with her sleeve, leaving me speechless. Big mother-in-law, who had been silent, sighed deeply and said, even if Jennifer were a worthless daughter-in-law, aren't you just as bad for kicking her in front of not only relatives but also guests? You oppress your husband and son, and use violence against a daughter-in-law just because she doesn't obey? You're like a frog in a well, thinking it knows everything. Mother-in-law finally fell silent at big mother-in-law's stern, yet not overly emotional voice. The trio, including mother-in-law, stood in the corner for a good hour. In the end, big mother-in-law let them eat because it'd be a waste of food to leave it. After the meal, I stopped big mother-in-law to express my deepest gratitude. While she still had a stern look, she advised, don't hesitate to cut off anyone who treats you poorly. Yet, her gaze seemed gentler than before. When I got home, my in-laws and Ken were already waiting at the front door. I bet you haven't been able to clean the yard since you've been out all day. Please take care of weeding, trimming the bushes, watering the flowers, and sweeping the porch now. After that, we'd like a massage, so hurry back when you're done. Perhaps to vent the embarrassment caused by my big mother-in-law, my mother-in-law piled on more chores than usual. Father-in-law and Ken were silent, but their stares were clearly malicious. They blocked my way, not letting me step inside the house, so I sighed. Oh, so you always get treated like this, huh? Peeking out from behind me was big mother-in-law. Actually, big mother-in-law had asked me to come here. Seeing her, the three stiffened up even more. Noticing the large bags big mother-in-law was carrying, their expressions grew more tense. Mom, you came all this way even though you're busy? For the first time in a while, father-in-law spoke up, only to be glared at by big mother-in-law. You guys are the ones piling on unnecessary work even though you know she's busy. From what I've seen, it seems like a little trouble wouldn't make you reflect on your actions. Big mother-in-law said this and handed one bag each to father-in-law and Ken. Yes, upset with their behavior at today's dinner, big mother-in-law had decided to move in for a while to discipline the three. During this time, she advised me to go back to my parents' house and even said that if things didn't improve, it might be best to consider divorce. We're about to start a fun living together. I'm so excited that I ended up bringing a lot of stuff. To make Jennifer turn her attention back to Ken and for you two to remember the love you once had, I'm gonna guide you wholeheartedly. The first time I saw Big Mother-in-law's smile, it seemed to have a mysterious charm that was both unsettling yet comforting. The next day, I contacted my parents and decided to take a short trip back to my childhood home. Ken tried to take advantage of this and snatched my phone, insisting he'd come with me. Before I could stop him, my dad shouted over the phone, "If you're the kind of man who stands by while my daughter is mistreated, she's better off without you. Don't show your face again." Ken ended up feeling down once again. After neglecting me for so long, I was stunned to see Ken shamelessly trying to lean on my parents. Whatever affection I had left for him vanished completely. Knowing full well how fiery his mother-in-law's temperament was, it seemed like Ken agreed to live with her because he was scared of refusing. He put me in the firing line, hoping to escape her wrath. Father-in-law probably has a similar nature. He too would remain silent, even when Ken was being chastised. I hope from now on, all three will be educated by the much scarier Big Mother-in-law and become more decent human beings. However, ever since then, while I've been relaxing at my childhood home, I receive calls almost daily. Most of the time, it's mother-in-law, but occasionally it's father-in-law or Ken. "Can you ask Big Mother-in-law to leave?" In short, he says this over and over again without hesitation. With me gone, all three are being thoroughly trained in household chores by Big Mother-in-law, and they tell me they're sore all over every day. On top of the physical exhaustion, they can't take out their frustrations on a daughter-in-law, so the atmosphere at home is constantly tense. It's not just Big Mother-in-law. Apparently, she's been calling over relatives unannounced for surprise inspections. The three of them are made to entertain the guests, spending their days in a state of constant tension. All three kept playing the victim, saying things like "kick out the Big Mother-in-law and come back. Why are we going through this?" So, I declared our divorce over the phone. Normally, it's something to be discussed face to face, but given how they treated me poorly, I figured I wasn't in the wrong to do it this way. With the mediation of the Big Mother-in-law, the divorce process was completed smoothly. I continued to stay at my childhood home, searched for a job, and decided to start a new life. Half a year later, a minor incident occurred at my workplace. Shockingly, my ex-husband, along with my in-laws, had tracked down my workplace and showed up unannounced. I wondered where the leak had come from, but then I got a call from Big Mother-in-law. She told me the letter Jennifer sent was opened without permission. Maybe that's how they found out. I calmed down the apologetic Big Mother-in-law and assured her that there was no harm done. At the entrance of my company, 3 of them were restrained by multiple security guards. Watching quietly from the floor above, I noticed they were repeatedly mentioning my name. They probably couldn't stand the scolding from Big Mother-in-law any longer. But Mother-in-law used to curse me with foul words every day, and both Father-in-law and Ken turned a blind eye, so it's no surprise they're in this situation now. I don't feel the slightest sympathy for them being manhandled by the security, and I don't want them in my sight anymore. Besides, I already had someone special in my life. This person respects my feelings, but also confidently shares his own opinions. He's someone I can really rely on. To be honest, I'm not yet brave enough to think about marriage, but I'm gonna take it slow and nurture our love.